Jiang approached Gu Kaishan, put his hand near his mouth and began to whisper, asking him to please trust him. Gu Kaishan started to gaze at the ground and remained listening in silence. A while later, he turned his head towards Zhao Yuanchen and with a serene look decided to trust him, and asked him to show him what he knew. Seeing this, Jiang, who was behind him, could not help but start smiling. Seeing that Gu Kaishan had given permission to Jiang for a death match against Jia Baihang, Duanfeng began pointing towards the sky with his finger, causing it to begin releasing a powerful energy. With a determined look, he decided to build a combat platform. Jia Baihang, his grandfather, Gu Kaishan and Jiang stood still without making any movement. And not long after, a small island rose from the sea and began to fly until it was positioned in the middle of them. Duanfeng used his power again, causing a barrier to appear. Only Zhao Baihang and Zhang could enter, preventing anyone from interfering. The arrogant Jia Baihang descended onto the combat platform with a smile full of confidence. He was eager for the fight to begin so that he could teach Jiang a good lesson. Last time he had won with the help of 9 miasma wings, but this time everyone would see how he was going to be defeated. At the same time, someone began to hit the barrier, but the attacks were useless. This person was none other than Zhai Gang. He drew his sword and started launching powerful attacks with the intention of breaking through the barrier. He was very furious and ordered Zhang Chen not to participate in the fight. He did not understand how Gu Kaishan could allow this. He began to despair as his eyes filled with guilt, since if he had not let Jiang enter the camp, none of this would have happened. Upon seeing his behavior, the aunt was somewhat confused. She tried to console him by saying that the master was not someone who made choices without thinking about the consequences. Gu Kaishan unsheathed the sword, and while holding it with both hands, he began to point the blade towards the sky, causing it to start emitting an intense golden energy. He asked Zhang to remember that the sword of heaven was the sword of will. He had to win the fight, and to do this, he had to act without thoughts and let himself be guided by his heart. Jiang began to observe the sword with a surprised look and fell silent. Gu Kaishan brought the sword closer to his face and with an aggressive gaze, he asked him to observe carefully. He used the technique called Energy Slash and using all his power, launched a powerful cut towards Jai Yuanchen, and it started to approach him at enormous speed. Upon seeing that Gu Kaishan he decided not to stand idly by and drew his sword, began to point the blade towards the sky, clenched his other fist tightly and used the ability called Total Defense, making his body start to emit an intense and powerful red energy. He could not believe that the old man was thinking that his attack could have any effect. Duanfeng began to look up, and upon witnessing this, he could not help but start sweating and panicking. His eyes filled with confusion as he did not know what was happening, and thought that this made no sense since both had agreed to let Jiang and Zhai Yuanchen have a fight. Zhai Yuanchen prepared to defend himself from the attack, but to his surprise the attack was not directed at him. As it passed by with great speed on the side, leaving him in shock and somewhat confused, the attack began to move quickly towards the sky until several seconds later it impacted against a barrier that was in the sky, causing it to break into pieces. The reality was that hidden in this barrier was a giant dragon. Gu Kaishan's attack impacted against the dragon. Cutting its tail in half, the dragon's eyes began to shine, and with a murderous look, it started to stare at Gu Kaishan. Jai Yuanchen began to look up at the sky and saw how the dragon's tail was falling to the ground. The dragon began to disappear into a crack, and with a look full of hatred called Gu Kaishan bastard, and it decided to come back for him. Several seconds later, the crack began to close and the dragon disappeared completely. Duanfeng started to look at the crack and was shocked, since this dragon was called Black Dragon, who lived under the Yangtze River. It was very dangerous. Everyone's attention had been fixed on the duel, and Gu Kaishan had been the only one who could perceive its presence. He rested his sword on his shoulder, and with a calm look revealed that this dragon was trying to have a chance to obtain the 9 miasma wings. This dragon has an 8th grade cultivation, half that of the 9 miasma wings. Zhai Yuanchen's eyes filled with surprise upon seeing that this old thief was indeed skilled. Gu Kaishan, who had the sword resting on his shoulder, turned around, closed his eyes, and began to laugh heartily, asking Zhang if it wasn't impressive to see the master wielding the sword for the first time. Zhang approached him, clenched both fists, and was impressed seeing this. Gu Keixuan asked him if he had learned something. Zhang began to smile and with a look full of confidence, extended his hand towards the ground, making green energy appear. He started to use his power and decided to borrow Uncle Zhai Gang's sword. A root appeared in Uncle Zhai Gang, who was somewhat confused, handed over the sword, causing the root to wrap around it. Zhang borrowed his sword, began to observe it and couldn't help but start smiling. Gu Keixuan, who was behind him, was somewhat confused, and with a surprised look asked why he didn't want to use his master's sword, and why he had borrowed Zhai Gang's sword, to which Zhang replied that soon he would understand why. He jumped up, got on the combat platform, and decided to wield the sword just like his master to look cool. Gu Keixuan, who was watching all this, thought that he was a very strange kid. Wang Yao descended to the island and was shocked, her eyes filled with worry, as she did not know how the master could allow this. According to her, this was equivalent to sending Jing to death. She remembered that Duan Feng was receiving benefits, and seeing that he still did nothing, she began to wonder what kind of invincible he was. She could not allow this to happen, so she decided to take Zhang away from here. Gu Keixuan, who was observing Zhang, remained silent in thought. She decided to intervene, but at that moment, her body stopped and she lost control. She became somewhat confused as now she could not move. Gu Keixuan crossed his arms and with a sincere look explained that in this arena of life and death, only Zhang and Zhai Obahan could enter. He knew that Zhang was strong, it's just that he had not manifested. Upon hearing this, her eyes filled with regret. A single energy could keep everyone away except for two people. This was the true power of an invincible being. She remembered that she had just spoken ill of him. In a calm voice, Gu Keixuan explained to her that Zhang did not want to provoke a war and did not want to see Jiangnan in ruins. Ong Yao turned her head towards him, and with a surprised look, she asked if it was necessary to sacrifice Zhang's life for the good of others. Gu Keixuan turned to her and with a serene look explained that Zhang Chen was not going to die since he had just taught him how to use the celestial sword. Upon hearing this, Ong Yao was left in shock and speechless at the same time. She did not know if the master was joking. At the same time in the combat arena, both threw their swords and Zhai Obihan began to laugh out loud, thinking that the old man was crazy if he believed that using the celestial sword was something that could be learned at a glance. Calling Zhang trash, Zhai Obihan's mockery did not affect Zhang, who gripped the sword tightly, and while it was surrounded by golden energy, he began to show a confident smile and decided to teach him if he really was trash. Zhai Obihan clenched his fist tightly and his body began to emit a suffocating malevolent energy. He wanted to see if he had the courage to fight against him without using the 9 miasma wings. Bai Feng and Zhang Huashuang were also observing this. Bai Feng asked him his opinion on who was going to be the winner. With an uncertain look he replied that if Zhang used the poisonous mist, then he was going to be the winner. The tension in the atmosphere began to heat up and Bai Feng reminded him that according to the rules, Zhang was not allowed to use this. Zhang Huashuang explained that then he was going to die since Zhai Obihan had experienced defeat and had gotten back up and focused his heart on martial arts, becoming stronger than before. Zhai Obihan began to look at Zhang with a gaze full of hatred and the sword began to emit a green energy. The sword he had in his hand was ranked 20th on the list of divine weapons of Great Xia. Zhang put the sword close to his face and adopted an offensive stance. Zhai Obihan began to point the sword at Zhang and with a smile praised him for having initiative. With his broken sword, dying under the glow of the moon was going to be an honor for him. Zhang started to look at him and with a smile asked him to stop talking so much. Then he raised the sword into the sky and it began to emit a purple energy. He placed his other hand in front and asked Gu Kaishan to watch closely and try to correct him if he had any mistakes. He used the technique sky knife called the Sword of Humanity, and using all his strength launched a powerful cut towards Zhai Obihan, causing him to go on alert and be surprised at the same time. The energy of the attack was so strong that the others began to cover their faces with their arms and close their eyes. No one knew what this was or why their eyes hurt. At that moment, Hong Yao appeared and using her power, created a red barrier around them, and ordered the people with weak souls to close their eyes. She couldn't believe that little Jiang had so much power. Gokaisen's eyes filled with surprise, and he couldn't help but be shocked. He couldn't believe that Jiang had really learned it, although he could only attack the soul. Just before the attack could hit, Xiaobihan accurately swung the sword and deflected the attack without much effort. He began to feel excited and with a smile mocked him, asking if this was the famous sword of the sky that he had been talking about so much. According to him, it had no abilities. Upon seeing that the attack could target the soul, he revealed that the Xiaobihan family was recognized for its powerful soul. He gripped the sword tightly, raised it into the sky, causing a golden moon to appear behind him. He used the ability called Star and Moon Cut and launched a powerful attack towards Jiang. He began to clean the blade of the sword and couldn't help but laugh. He adopted a defensive stance and revealed that the first attack had only been a test. The second attack was the potent one. He grabbed the sword tightly and with a look full of hatred revealed that this attack was not aimed at the soul. Jiang used the technique called Earth Knife. He launched a powerful cut towards Xiaobihan and it effortlessly cut the moon in half. In the process, it also wounded Xiaobihan, who began to bleed. His eyes filled with surprise as he did not know how this was possible. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,